Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. We are coming to you from the traditional unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. And we're asking you, how are you marking the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation? What are the barriers still hindering reconciliation? First, we'll touch down in the Nishka Nation in the Northwest as members welcome home a totem pole taken from their territory decades ago. After 12:30, Brian Minter takes your gardening questions. I'm Michelle Eliot. Welcome to BC Today. And thank you for joining us on CBC Radio 1, live streaming on CBC Gem, cbc.ca/BC, and you can find us on YouTube. Just search for CBC Vancouver. And today, a memorial totem pole that was taken from Indigenous territory in northwestern BC will finally be returned to its home. The pole belongs to members of the Nishka Nation, but for nearly a century, it has been on display at the National Museum of Scotland. This is a piece of Nishka history that has been separated from its homeland. Today, it is being rematriated. CBC reporter Lindsay Duncombe joins me now from the Nishka Museum in Lakelsap. Lindsay, hello.
Hi there.
Well, tell us, can you describe where you are and what's been happening today?
Well, we are in the absolutely stunning Nass Valley underneath a cloudy sky at the parking lot of the beautiful museum here, and community members are beginning to gather for a welcome ceremony for this totem pole that dates back to the 1860s. There's a real sense that something very significant is about to happen. You know, for the Nishka people, when a memorial totem pole is created, the artist, the carver, breathes the spirit of the person that is being honored with the pole into the wood. And so for the people in this community, they feel as though they've been separated from a family member for the better part of a decade. And what's happening now is really both reconciliation and reunion. We're expecting it to be quite emotional.
I can imagine. I'd love to ask you about that. You know, what are you hearing from people about just how meaningful and significant today is?
It is about family, right? It's about having something that was so meaningful and so valuable just taken away back in 1929. The nation says that a Scottish ethnographer came, took the pole, sold it to the museum, and it was really from the work of Dr. Amy Parent, who is a descendant of the person who the pole was dedicated to, and other delegations of the Nishka Nation that went to try to bring this pole back. And you know, that it's happening on Reconciliation Day or the day before Truth and Reconciliation Day is somewhat of significance. You know, this is when feasts are planned and celebrations are planned. But it's very meaningful because the people who are behind this say this is what reconciliation looks like. You know, at every step along the way of the journey of trying to bring this pole back, all of the people that were involved in it had conversations about what was happening and why it was happening. Even the people who built the scaffolding in Scotland, they learned about the pole and how it was taken and how that was part of the colonial past and where it was going. And to the military personnel who brought it back, to the border personnel. So at every step in the way, there have been the kinds of conversations that, you know, for the people who work in the museum, the people who deal with these ongoing issues, they say that's really the root of reconciliation.
And it wasn't, you know, logistically, it was quite a task to bring it home, wasn't it?
You know, I didn't really realize it until we saw the time-lapse video that the Scottish National Museum provided. And what it shows is the time it took to actually build an entire scaffold, because much of the gallery that this totem pole was presented in was actually built around the pole itself. It's 11 meters high, and it was built in the 1860s.
Wow.
So it is old, precious wood. So you see all that come down, and then you have to go from the big museum in Scotland over the ocean. That was done with the Department of National Defense on two different flights. One flight, which was part of a regularly scheduled flight from Scotland to CFB Trenton, and then from CFB Trenton to Terrace. And there you see that these crates that would these tarp-covered crates, 11 meters high. It's in two sections. The head of the totem is separated from the longer body. It was that's how it was transported. It will be put together again here.
Yes, and I'm sorry to jump in, but on our live stream, you can see right now those crates on flatbed trucks being brought to the museum and people welcoming them. We've been watching some of the ceremonies that have taken place already, some drumming and singing and blanket ceremonies, and a dance ceremony will take place in just over half an hour from now, Lindsay. What will take place this afternoon?
We are expecting a dance ceremony to welcome the totem pole home. I'm told there will be 90 dancers that are participating. We're having just buses and buses of elders are pulling up. I think we're expecting hundreds of people. This is also, in terms of reconciliation, an opportunity for politicians and leaders to show up and be part of that whole conversation. The Premier is expected to be here today, so is NDP leader Jagmeet Singh. So it really is kind of this mixture of official ceremony and something that's incredibly personal.
Lindsay, thank you so much. What a privilege for you and for us to be able to witness through you what's taking place today. Thank you for joining us.
Great to talk to you.
CBC reporter Lindsay Duncombe joining us from the Nishka Museum in Lac Sept. And we will have much more coverage of the rematriation of a memorial totem pole to its home with members of the Nishka Nation throughout the day here on CBC. You can see our story on our website as well at cbc.ca/BC. The return of that totem pole, as you heard, is a symbol of reconciliation. As we mark tomorrow's National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, there are still hurdles. We're going to hear more about that in just a moment. We'd also like to hear from you. How are you marking the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation? And what are the barriers that still hinder reconciliation? Love to hear your thoughts. 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can also hit pound 690 on your cell phone. By email, you can reach us bctoday@cbc.ca. My guest is Jeff Nichols, an associate lawyer at Ratcliffe & Company and a member of the Lakwalams First Nation. And he's been good enough to join me here in our studio. Hello, welcome.
Hi, Michelle.
It's so good to have you here with us today. I know you were listening to Lindsay there. I saw you nodding your head. How are you reflecting on National Day for Truth and Reconciliation?
Well, I think that first and foremost, when I look ahead to the National Day of Truth and Reconciliation, I think first to the survivors of residential schools and the legacy that they've had to endure, but also the contributions that they've made to our society by educating us about their experience, bringing it to light. I think back, I actually, over a decade ago now, as an even younger person, attended the Truth and Reconciliation Commission hearings, and the stories that were shared, still stay with me today, and so I'll certainly be thinking about that tomorrow.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember covering some of those hearings here, and those days still stay with me. And the courage that people had to come and share their stories still stay with me for sure. You talk about the TRC, and of course the 94 calls to action were published out of those hearings. We heard this morning on the early edition from Douglas Sinclair, who created the website Indigenous Watchdog, that is tracking the progress of addressing those calls to action. And he says just 13 have been completed. How do you feel about the progress that we're making?
I certainly feel that there's a long road ahead in order to live up to what I am hopeful. I believe in Canada's national commitment to reconciliation. So I share that commitment myself. I see so much good things that are happening that inspire me, and I also understand the pragmatic reality that there's a long way that we need to go in order to meaningfully address what the Truth and Reconciliation Commission has set out for us.
And you do some of that work yourself in the legal profession. What do you see as still the legal hurdles to reconciliation?
I think that in particular for my own practice, we obviously advocate for the needs of First Nations. And so, in the context of Aboriginal rights, every day I'm fortunate to get to learn about the experiences of our clients and advocate to push the needle forward. I think that many of your listeners, may understand that the court system, for better or worse, has really pushed reconciliation forward in this country through milestone pieces of litigation that have set out the various standards that we know, like the duty to consult, for example, or Aboriginal rights. Mm-hmm. And then I also see very the practical reality of living with the Indian Act for many First Nations. And so much of my work is involved in either, finding creative ways to use the structures that we have, but also think forward in terms of moving beyond the Indian Act into a place of reconciliation.
What is it like to try to work within that structure of the Indian Act? What impact does it have on self-governance, on people's identities?
Yeah, I really see... I want to honor the fact that, First Nations have not sat idly by in these, systems of oppression, quite frankly. And so I see intimately the ways in which First Nations are, pushing forward, even despite the limitations. So, I see the leadership of First Nations leaders in their communities, the staff, the people, doing the best they can to meet the needs of their communities. And then also as a lawyer, I see and understand, like most, that the Indian Act is just not an appropriate tool in an era of reconciliation to affect governance. So that's something that I really focus on is, trying to figure out a way to move beyond the Indian Act.
Moving beyond the Indian Act. I'd love to ask you more about that as well. My guest, Jeff Nichols, an associate lawyer at Ratcliffe & Company, and he is a member of the Lakwalams First Nation. We are asking you, how are you marking the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation? And what to you are the barriers that still hinder reconciliation? You can give us a call, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone or email us, bctoday@cbc.ca. Roman is joining us from Port Alberni. Roman, welcome to the program. Nice to hear from you.
Hello, good afternoon to you. I really appreciate the topic today, and I really thank your pundit there for sharing some really major points of what I wanted to make. So, thinking on my feet here, I want to say, I fully agree with what he said about the fact that this is a multi-layered and multifaceted issue for both sides to sit down and try and figure out. That being said, one of the big things that has to be brought forth is not only to thank the survivors who survived, but the ones who made that extra effort after the fact, shared their love, and shared their belief in our culture enough that it was kept alive for us. We're learning our language again. We're learning about our history, and not just the stuff from the residential school, who we are, where we're from, how we connect to the land, why it's so important to be who we are, our roots back to the beginning of our existence, so that when our branches reach into the future generations, they'll have a good sturdy base off of which to grow those branches and to reach into the sunlight and beyond. So I really want to say that for tomorrow, I hope we as Indigenous and all of our allies and our cohorts are celebrating that we have made some miles, some kilometers, if you will, we're in Canada, that we're making progress, however frustrating and however slow it is. We've already been here for over 100 years. And one of the big things that guides us, I believe, and this is my perspective on it, is our belief in the Creator and our belief in the spirituality that comes with our cultures that have been passed on to us from those survivors that have made it past the residential school system times and help us to plant new seeds for our trip into the future. If I just briefly here give you an example of what I mean by our language and our faith, I'm going to share a quick prayer that, again, I'm a learner, and my mom's a really wonderful teacher, Chisma. She taught me about our language growing up, and I've had many grandparents who did, and this is a prayer I use. Waikashnas hatlapi hawas, Waikash nas hasapi hawal, sa kwasutil hawal, si aksi, aquapis hawal, jama pisapis hawal, Waikash nas true. And what I've said is, praise the light of the day, O Creator. Praise the light of the day, O Creator. I'm pleading with you, Creator. Give me strength. Keep me strong. Help me to stand with honor, dignity, and respect. And I really hope that many people are working towards that, despite those obstacles, which are the biggest ones to truth and reconciliation, which happen to be fear and ignorance. Right now, we need to find the courage that'll guide us through that, because fear and ignorance are leading to a lot of awful things, not just for Indigenous, but for BIPOC, for all of the people across all the spectrums that want to identify as themselves. So I really hope that, again, topics like this help us to open eyes and open hearts.
Wow. Roman, I realize it's been emotional for you to speak to this, and you always have something poignant and profound to share with us. I really appreciate your joining us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you to the survivors. We're all still here.
That's Roman from the Ahousaht First Nation and joining us from Port Alberni. You were really listening intently to his call.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to say how amazing it is to hear Indigenous languages over the air. It's incredible. It warms my heart. One thing that came to mind while Roman was speaking is, and this is something I think about, is the fact that in the Indian Residential School Settlement Agreement and many other efforts that survivors have made, I'm always struck by the fact that provision has been made for a public recognition of, and public education of these issues, right? So, there's been a direct contribution of survivors to Canadians' understanding to make sure that this never happens again. And so, I think a lot about that, about how, survivors have given us that directly. And I think that days like the National Day of Truth and Reconciliation, come into focus in that regard, because, this has been set out for us as time to reflect. And that's very powerful.
Yeah. Thank you very much for your call. Always good to hear from you, Roman, and thank you for your call today. Really appreciate it. Let's take another call now. And as we ask you, how are you marking the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation? And what are the hurdles still that you see that impede or hinder reconciliation? You can give us a call, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, pound 690 on your cell phone. And Marissa is joining us now from Victoria. How are you, Marissa?
Oh,
hi, Marissa. Yes, go ahead.
Hi. Oh, it's actually pronounced Marissa.
Marissa, my apologies.
Yeah, no, it's all good. I really appreciated Roman's words, and it was very impactful. And I started my own journey of truth and reconciliation for like the past 15 years. I've gone to powwows. I've listened to elders talk about their stories and whatnot. And my son's birthday coincidentally happens to be September 30th. So tomorrow here in Victoria, we're going to be going to the powwow. And so I think for me, what's important, especially as a parent, is to just pass on that information about the negative legacy of residential schools and how it is continuing to impact Indigenous communities across the country. And just having my son kind of open to that awareness, I hope that will allow him to be less, ignorant and judgmental towards Indigenous people as a whole. And I think it's important to have those kind of conversations. And I think it would be really invaluable if there was mandatory courses from K to 12 across Canada where you get to learn about Indigenous heritage, positive and the negative legacies, and also just talking about how we can move forward and past that.
Thank you so much for the call, Marissa. And education is so important. Thank you very much for your call. Happy birthday to your son.
Yeah,
tomorrow.
thank you.
It is really important, isn't it? And that was certainly one of the calls to action, is addressing education. I think about it a lot. My kids, it certainly is a big part of their curriculum. My son, his friends right now, as part of their school, they're reading Indian Horse by Richard Wagamese. And it starts that conversation. What are the changes there that you've seen?
Well, when I think about the legal profession, there's now a mandatory course for all lawyers in British Columbia. I have to complete mine by January 1st of next year, and it's a substantial educational tool that is going to educate our profession in these issues. And so I'm very proud of that. And then an organization I'm a part of, Raven Trust, has recently developed an educational tool called Home and Native Land, and it's open and free to anybody. And so Home and Native Land, and you can learn about, as your caller spoke about, some of those things from a perspective that I think maybe some of your listeners, and certainly I understand, maybe the textbooks in school don't always share an appropriate perspective. And so, there's been a lot of growth and change as we've learned about good ways of understanding our relationship between Indigenous Canadians and the broader public.
How important is it, you talk about the work that you do, how important is it to have Indigenous representation in those efforts?
Oh, it's incredibly important. I think that's been a big part of reconciliation, as I've seen it, is just making space for an Indigenous voice or perspective in affairs that affect Indigenous peoples. I mean, it sounds so obvious, right? It's like, if the matter affects Indigenous peoples or it's about Indigenous peoples, well, Indigenous peoples should be, in my view, leading that kind of conversation. A big theme that I think about around reconciliation and certainly try to promote in my work is self-determination for First Nations people. And I think that a lot of, I had a university professor that, you put a set of values on the board in chalk, and the first one was, the solution to this thing is not going to be paternalism, right? So if anywhere that you see paternalism, that's not the solution. So, things like that stick out at me, and we should be supporting First Nations self-determination, which includes making space for a First Nations voice.
And so what do you see as impeding that? You'd be talking about the Indian Act, for example, and how do you move past that?
I think that, certainly, speaking very practically about the work that, I do, I'm involved a lot in supporting First Nations to build out their own governance systems on their own terms. And that involves, as I spoke about, supporting their self-determination. And to speak very frankly, the Indian Act is just not an appropriate tool in today's day and age to affect contemporary self-government. We've seen, your listeners heard about the story of the Nishka Nation, for example. Repatriating that pole. The Nishka, are leaders in. They have their treaty. They've negotiated. Their governance, and that's something to be celebrated. And I think that other First Nations are on that journey as well, as figuring out a way to use the Indian Act creatively, yes, but also move beyond it into very interesting, reconciliation arrangements that recognize their own governance and their own values.
And that's an important point you make. The Nishka Treaty, that was a while back now. And so when it comes to timelines and things can be, each nation is different. And so how do you approach that then, the specific timelines and processes that each one will take?
And you raise a very important point, because it looks different for every First Nation. I think that's part of the a bad element of the Indian Act is it's a one-size-fits-all. It's a piece of federal legislation that's designed to cover the hundreds of First Nations in Canada, and it's just it doesn't deal with enough specificity to First Nations have such wide-ranging governance traditions in this country, and those need to be enacted in order to realize a vision of self-determination and also realize reconciliation in this country.
Jeff, how will you be marking tomorrow?
Tomorrow, I'm going to be at Gordon Neighborhood House, which is in the West End. It's a community center They're doing some really cool stuff. They have an artist, a Squamish artist, John Spence, and he's been carving a house post there. He's on his second one now. Tomorrow at Gordon Neighborhood House, I believe from 11 until 2, there's an event going on. And it's just a community gathering where folks can hear some speakers, share in some food. And then that's where I'll be. And then, of course, my heart and thoughts will be in reflection on what tomorrow means.
Yes, you've really encapsulated both of those aspects of tomorrow. Thank you so much for your time. It's been so good to have you with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
That's Jeff Nichols, an associate lawyer at Ratcliffe and Company, a member of the Laqualams First Nation. And he mentioned the event tomorrow in the west end of Vancouver. Many events are being held tomorrow to mark the day. Also in Vancouver, a community gathering at Trout Lake in Maple Ridge, Healing Through Drumming, an event hosted by the Fraser River Indigenous Society. That's going to be at Memorial Peace Park. In Kelowna, the West Bank First Nation are hosting a drum circle at Elders Hall. In Williams Lake, Orange Shirt Day will take place at the Williams Lake Stampede Grounds. And you can see much more of those events. Go to our website, cbc.ca/BC. It's 12:32 now, 1:32 in the Mountain Time Zone. You're with BC Today here on CBC. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Michelle Eliot. And coming up in our next half hour, Brian Minter will take your gardening questions. He'll talk about regenerative gardening and what it means to sustainability. That's coming up after the CBC News Update with Robert Zimmerman.
Good afternoon. The Nishka Nation in northwestern BC is hosting a day-long celebration to mark the return of a totem pole that was taken from its territory decades ago. It was housed in a Scottish museum for almost a century. The totem was carved in 1860 to honor a member of the Frog Clan who was in line to be chief. A march will be held at UBC's Point Grey campus tomorrow in honor of Canada's third Truth and Reconciliation Day. The march honors those who suffered at or did not come home from Indian residential schools here in BC and across the country. And the provincial government has issued an environmental assessment certificate for the container port expansion project at Roberts Bank in Delta. It's almost entirely on federal land and received approval from Ottawa in the spring. The BC Environment Ministry says it couldn't stop the expansion from going forward and has given its approval to protect provincial interests. And now the forecast on the north coast, clearing this afternoon with a high of 13. Highs up to 10 and cloudy with local smoke in the Peace. In the central interior, a mix of sun and cloud with a high of 10 as well. Highs to 14 and mainly sunny in the West Kootenay, mainly cloudy in the East Kootenay. In the southern interior, including Kelowna, a few showers with some sunshine and a high of 15. And for Metro Vancouver, Greater Victoria, and the Fraser Valley, lots of sunshine this afternoon with highs around 16. I'll have more local news at the top of the hour. Now back to Michelle with BC Today.
Thank you, Rob. I can see the sunshine along Georgia Street right now. It is very beautiful. Thank goodness for windows.
Yeah.
Nice view of the downtown sunshine. Thank you so much, Rob.
You bet.
Robert Zimmerman in the CBC Vancouver newsroom. Welcome back. This is BC Today here on CBC Radio 1, live streaming as well on our website, cbc.ca/BC. You can find us on YouTube at CBC Vancouver, or you can use the CBC Gem app. It's 12:34 now, 1:34 in the Mountain Time Zone. Well, we all want our gardens to be more sustainable. And one way to do that is through regenerative gardening. Our gardening columnist, Brian Minter, is here with some tips about that. And as always, he is taking your questions. You can call us 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. And you can hit pound 690 on your cell phone too. If you want to email us your question, it's bctoday@cbc.ca. And master gardener and horticulturalist Brian Minter, our longtime gardening columnist on the show, joins me now from Country Garden Limited in Chilliwack. Hello, Brian.
Gosh, Michelle, it's wonderful to talk to you, and so nice to have a great audience to talk about things that are really important. And I appreciate your sun is great. You know, we needed the rain badly, but when you get some sunshine, it's kind of special. It really is.
It is, yes.
But when we say regenerative gardening, and when we talked this morning, Michelle, I did mention that at this particular time, 50% of the world's topsoil is gone. And if we don't change our practices, a lot more is going to disappear over a period of time. And it's so invaluable, it really is, for so many different reasons. But when we say regenerative agriculture or regenerative gardening, folks are a little unsure, what does that really mean? And essentially, it basically is a process of rebuilding and getting the soil back to its original state. That is viable, things grow well, it sequesters carbon, it does all the things that create a wonderful environment for microorganisms in the soil, and worms we talked about as well, how important. So basically, what are the three principles? And I had a chance to talk to one of the head ladies in America about regenerative gardening and commercial for the farming community, regenerative farming. And it really it comes down to a few essential things. Number one is, if we can, try never to leave your soil bare when you're harvesting crops. And I notice in our community right now, a lot of corn is being harvested. And I'm so happy to see that when the corn is harvested, the soil isn't bare. There's residue of leaves and stems all over the soil and so on, because you need protection for the soil from sun, cold, the elements of weather.
Right.
The soil needs that little bit of protection. So that's one thing. Second thing is, because everybody wants to clean up their garden, they're going to be nothing on the garden, nice and clean. The second thing is, and this lady in the United States says, we're really making headway here in terms of the farming community and also the gardening community, putting cover crops for winter. That is so important. Not only you protect the soil, but you're rebuilding the soil in so many ways, either immediately by using legumes like peas and winter peas and so on, that fix nitrogen as they grow, or the fall rye that we talked about. And fall rye, of course, is not really valuable. I mean, it's valuable now, we understand, for protecting the soil.
Right.
But until as green manure, you work it back in the spring. And then there's things like barley, which are very important as well. The nice thing about barley is if you put it on now, it'll do its work. By the end of winter, it kind of disappears. And so it makes it easier to work in your garden in the spring, which is great as well. So there's many different options in terms of cover crops. It depends really what you want for the wintertime. But it is incredibly important to build up the soil again. And the third one, which is, and people kind of look a little puzzled when we talk about this, is basically no-till gardening or minimal-till agricultural land, rejuvenation. And what that really means is, instead of using in a farming community the big chain plows that go through and turn everything up, the folks around the world who are very much into this type of gardening have lighter materials that basically just move the soil and change the soil and open the soil enough to get your crops in and have them do well. And in the garden as well, instead of digging, you should be able to very easily, with lighter equipment, open up the soil to get the weeds and so on out, so it's ready for doing. And people say, well, it's so hard. How do we do that? We have a local harvest community garden or market garden in Chilliwack, a young fellow that we used to work with as a student, and he's done an amazing job. And he's been doing this for years. And what he does, Michelle, is put a lot of organic matter. Mushroom compost, he has a lot of farms locally, so he's able to use that to build up the soil. So in fact, when you actually put your hands in the soil, it's not hard, it's more open and more porous, and it's easily worked. So in terms of our home garden, yes, getting organic matter, the compost we have, of course, any organic matter. I love mushroom because it has a bit of fiber in it to open up the soil, so it doesn't become that hard mass that's so hard to penetrate. And that's really the three elements: is the minimal till gardening, always leave your soil with some residue on it. And of course, using your winter cover crops, all those things help an awful lot. And of course, with that, we also organic garden as much as we possibly can, and keep it going for as long as we can, depending on your area. So those things are awfully important. So it is really making a difference. People are moving this way. And I asked the lady in America, are they, farmers, are they making more money by doing this on the land? Because that's a survival thing for farmers. It's very, very important. And she said, it's hit and miss in terms of that. She said it's a little bit one way or the other. But because of the way they're working the soils now, using less equipment, less nutrient and fertilizers, they have to buy chemical fertilizers. she said the decrease in the amount of input they have more than makes up for what they're doing. So essentially, it's better for the environment, and overall, it'll improve year after year. So those are very important things.
Yeah.
Michelle, I have to sneak one thing in here too, if I may. Lawns right now. This is so important to everybody, and I guess we're all looking at the rain we've had is precious in terms of getting moisture back in there. So a lot of the lawns are recovering. But to help them along, because when lawns do this over time, a lot of the lawn grasses just simply die out. Well, wonderful time for overseeding. And just the two quick ones, in talking to an authority on turf grass the other day. Number one is probably perennial ryegrasses are the nicest thing to put on for sustainability over a longer period of time. And also there's a tall fescue, what is called a tall fescue, that a lot of people are looking at as well, because this tall fescue is much more drought tolerant. In other words, it'll need far less water and care when we have these drought periods. So that's something you consider. A lot of the golf courses, he was saying, in Vancouver Island are looking at tall fescues right now because they can't use as much water as they normally would be doing because of a number of situations. So that's something out there. And of course, clover. And I would want to mention one thing. A lot of people are talking about the micro clovers, which are very tiny. They do die back in wintertime, so it's not a good time to do that now. But the white Dutch clover, from which the micro clovers came, would be a very good thing to put on right now, because it's funny, you go out on a dead-looking lawn in the middle of summer, the clover's fine. It's nice and green. It's fixing nitrogen. It's those things. So there's options in terms of when we look at the long-term situation in terms of no water and heat, and how our lawns, become an important resource, and they can be for our neighborhoods for cooling and so many other things. Here's some options that folks might want to think about.
Wow, so much there for us to digest. And also, I know, speaking of making a difference, someone who was your student is now running these community gardens, or a student you were working with is now running these community gardens. What an impact you're making, Brian. Brian Minter is with me.
Him is making the impact.
That's true. And you through him, of course. Let's take some questions now for Brian. Our numbers again are 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. Pound 690 on your cell phone. Pam is joining us from Salmon Arm with a question about spring bulbs and tulips. Looking ahead already, Pam.
Yes, I am, my dear. Hello, Brian, and thanks for taking my call. I have these lovely, beautiful orange tulip bulbs, and I'm just wondering if it might be too soon yet to put them out in my pots. The temperatures around here in the mornings are still out front only between 8 and 10 degrees, and I'm scared that if I plant them now, they'll start growing too soon. What do you think?
Pam, that's a perfect question. Many people are thinking the same thing. No, it's not too warm. They can go in any time. We have a wonderful daffodil community in Bradner, just between the valley and Vancouver, and they raise lots of daffodil bulbs there. But the situation is, and I was surprised, a few years ago, I was picking up the daffodils from them, and it was probably 35 degrees out, extremely hot. The daffodils were stacked out on trays, probably 10, 15 high in that hot sun, and doing very well. That's the way we get them dry and ready to go for the fall. So yeah, you can certainly do that. My only concern, Pam, is about putting them in containers. The containers will have to be protected for winter. That's the one thing I worry about. Because sometimes it's better to bury the containers in the ground, so they're just like they're growing in the ground, and lift them at a later date. But no, what you're doing, remember, well-drained soil is very, very important for them, and plant them whatever the width of the bulb is, 3 times that depth, and I hope that helps. I love what you're doing, Pam, but just remember that in a container, they need a little more winter protection.
Okay, my dear. Just wrap them with something like poly wrap or something.
Well, you know what, Pam, if you can, if it's at all possible, we do it as well. We put mulch over top, bark mulch over top of all the bulbs we pot out to come for the springtime or early spring. We cover them with mulch, and they're completely covered, protected, and sawdust or bark mulch would be ideal. You really need to do that, Pam.
Okay. Thank you so much, my dear.
Thank you so much, Pam. Tulips never fail to bring a smile to my face. So you are in for a treat come spring. Thanks so much for the call. Victoria is joining us from Vancouver with a question for Brian Minter. Hi there, Victoria.
Hi, thank you. I saw Amanda Vila, fell in love, built a pot put it on the fence, built a trellis, thought it was a perennial. My neighbors have told me that I have to bring it inside in the winter, and I'm just so worried that I bought it to kill it because I can't bring it inside. Can I keep it outside and save it? It just thrived. And
only if you dig it up and move to Southern California or Florida. Two choices there. No, it is a tropical plant. First of all, Victoria, I totally agree with you. I'm in love with the mandevillas in terms of the type of weather we're having, the heat and drought. They take it better than anything. And the display is amazing. They're pretty much insect-free.
So
they're wonderful. But Pam, what I would do, you are going to have to dig it up and maybe just cut it back extremely hard, maybe 6 inches above the ground. Don't do it now. Wait until probably middle of October, and put it, if you can, anywhere in your home in a small pot, and by a windowsill where it's cool, and see if you can't get it to come back again. But that's the only way, because Victoria, it is a tropical plant. I'm sorry.
It's, they sell it at the nursery as a perennial. And I read that and I thought, I'm in.
Yeah, I'm sorry. And there's confusion about that. And Victoria, you bring up a very good point. It is a perennial, but not a hardy perennial. So we refer to those as tender perennials. So sorry for the confusion, but don't give up on them because they're amazing.
Oh, don't give up on them, Victoria. It sounds like you really are in love with your mandevilla.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for the call. We are rooting for you. Thanks so much. Virginia is joining us from Fort Langley with a question for Brian Minter. Our number again is 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. And you had a question about your lawn, Virginia.
Yes, Brian, on your lawn theme, we have sort of started over with our front lawn. It's been covered with cardboard and mulch for months, and it's ready to go now. So our plan is to put topsoil and then sod on top rather than seeding it, but I just don't know whether I can buy the kind of sod that is the kind of drought-resistant grass you're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you bring up a very, very good point, Virginia. When you're buying sod, there's so many different types of sod. I mean, there's clay turf where, sports fields and so on use something different than other folks. And what you really want to get is, I guess, heat and drought tolerant sod as much as they possibly can. And it's never one seed. It would be a combination of seed, Virginia. So do ask that. I think it's awfully important that you get those, but you do need perennial ryegrasses in there. That's certainly the standard today. And ask them, as we talked about, if they have any the annual ryegrass or the tall fescue, rather. The tall fescue is what a lot of people are doing right now, because that'll give you your really good drought tolerance in the summertime. With minimal watering, you can keep that looking good. So, and if you can't,
companies are likely to have those things.
Well, it's been a while because we work with the seed companies and so on. So I'm not sure what they're doing, but it's a very important question to ask. Okay. And if it's not possible to get that, maybe look at seeding as an alternative. And Virginia, only one other thing I was a little concerned about is rather than putting a little bit of topsoil in, how big is your area? Is it a huge lawn or a smaller lawn?
Somewhere in between those two.
Okay. If it's possible, you can't just lay the turf with a little bit of topsoil. You really do need to break up the soil to open it up. And the secret is to have enough, and you get a lot of sand in there as well. You want a subsoil where the roots can go down deep. And the problem is we have so little soil and so many lawns that these dry up because they have nowhere to go. So anything you can do to deepen the soil, the subsoil where the turf is going to go underneath, so that then we do get dry weather, the roots will go deeper. And I would say that every playing field where the kids play soccer is 1 foot of pure sand over top. We don't want to go to that extreme, but it sure makes a difference. You look at some of those fields in the summer, they're pretty good.
Okay. I hadn't thought of the sand. Okay. Thank you very much.
Yeah, Virginia, thank you. And you're right, an important question, Brian, and a very common one, I imagine now, right? As we face...
oh my gosh. And people are wondering, do I do a lawn? What do I do? And
that's right.
And so they're really thinking about something that, as we look forward, what is the future? And so it's going to be, the effective lawns and cooling neighborhoods and so on, and all the things that they do for the environment. and we're using basically electric mowers or battery-operated mowers now. So,
and
we're not
so much
using
water, yeah.
chemicals anymore. Yeah, it's becoming a very important thing. And by getting clovers in there, you become a pollinator source as well.
There's that as well. Another benefit. Thanks so much for the call, Virginia. We are now going to take another call. Let's head to the island. And Andrew has a question about rhododendrons not doing so well. Hi, Andrew.
Hi, Michelle. How are you?
I am fine. How are your rhododendrons?
Not good.
Oh.
Well, Brian and Michelle, I have 3 rhododendrons in my backyard. They're fairly large. 2 of them look good. They're the nice, rich, kind of jade green color. One is, I would say, more of a yellowy green. Leaves are drooping. Some of the leaves are even kind of going brown, like burned looking and crunchy. And it's just looks like it's hurting, and I'm not sure what to do.
Yeah, basically, and knowing where you are, I would do 3 things. And first of all rhododendrons were exposed to the heat and they weren't getting enough water, are looking in pretty tough shape right now, but please don't give up on them. The thing that we want to do is after they leaf out, or when they leaf out in the spring, and or when the flowers come out next spring, it's all those old leaves that are still there. We need to prune them back to allow new growth to come, and rhodos will regenerate out of old wood. So we always have that alternative. Please keep that in mind. But personally, right now, I would do 3 things. Number 1, I would put a layer of fir hemlock bark mulch around the rhodos again, they're shallow rooted, even for winter protection and so on. But the moisture protection, we're still going to get warm weather for the next little while, and we're still going to get dry weather too. So essentially, let's put some mulch around them. And the other thing is, when we water, we don't want to water under the tree. We water the drip line, soak it thoroughly. And again, a little bit of water we've had hasn't penetrated deep into the soil. So we really need to get to where we can water, restrictions are being lifted, water the perimeter of that tree. And the third thing is a little unusual in terms of when it goes on, but I would put on a rhododendron and azalea food right now because 2 things. Number 1, it's not high in nitrogen. It's high in the other 2 numbers usually, so that it'll quietly over the winter time toughen up and strengthen the tree and give it a little more nutrient, which has been missing in many cases. So the rhodo and azalea food now, the mulching around, doing around the perimeter with a good deep soaking of water, and then basically in the spring we're going to assess it when the leaves come out, when new growth comes, how hard we prune it back to get it back into shape. And trust me, I've seen huge rhodos, 20, 30 feet high, recover beautifully by pruning back almost in half. They come back. This takes 2 or 3 years, but you do get them back.
Okay, so wait till spring to trim it back, though, for sure.
Yes, only when the new growth comes, because then it'll regenerate that new old woody stems you see will throw out new growth quite nicely.
And you can assess then. Andrew, hope is not lost. Thank you so much. He sounded so dejected when he was describing that. Thank you, Andrew. Good luck to you. Our last caller now is Palinka from the North Shuswap. And Palinka, you have an important question.
Yes, I was wondering whether, I'm guessing many people know that we've lost over 200 houses on the North Shuswap to the fires.
Yeah, tragedy, yes.
And I wondered if Brian has any advice for replanting gardens and surrounds with, what he would suggest. In terms of very badly burnt gardens, say, like if a forest fire goes through, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Palinka, basically, I'm one of the spokespeople for Fire Smart BC. And we, again, it's avoiding evergreen trees and shrubs because the sap in them is very flammable and so on. So switching garden over to deciduous plants that don't have the same flammability, that's certainly number 1. And there's a whole range of things today we've never had before and hardy in your area. One of the ones I love are some of the shrub dogwoods, for example, because in winter they have the beautiful stems to look at. But there's a range, and don't do it right away. Think about a plan or get some help for someone who's knowledgeable about to give you a nice look year round and sort of change that look. You can do that.
In terms of the soil, is the burnt soil going to hamper new plantings?
No, it's not. Again, it took a bit of a beating. by adding organic matter into the soil to enrich the soil will certainly help an awful lot. No question over that. But the soil will be good. It's just like in the forest fires. There's a whole process when a fire decimates an area. Nature starts with some of the perennials that come up first to shade some of the trees of the process, but they all grow in that beautifully. And the other thing is just to, in the support of lawns, if you can get a green lawn around your home, it does help. We talked about 1 inch, which is, just a couple of centimeters of water a week will keep them nice and green. And as we talked about, using tall fescues in your grass mix will help make sure that it's very, very drought tolerant. But having that green around your home again is very, very important. But the many benefits of lawn are huge as well.
Absolutely. Pelinka, I can tell it's important to you in terms of rebuilding, hey?
Absolutely, it is. Don't forget about us. We're still rebuilding.
Absolutely.
Our heart goes out to you. Yeah.
The good thing is no one died, and it's brought us closer together as a community, I believe. So.
Yeah.
Pelinka, what a great reminder, important reminder of what communities that were affected by wildfire are still going through in terms of rebuilding. I hope to touch base with you again, okay? Thank you so much for the call.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
All the best to you. That's Pelinka joining us from the North Shuswap. I think that is a good call to end our segment on, Brian. What a reminder.
Oh, gosh. And we, as we're busy doing things, we forget about the tragedy they've gone through and the heartbreak and the worry. And, so it's, they're very much a part of our BC community. And we, our heart goes out to them all.
Absolutely. Our heart goes out to you. Thank you so much, Brian. Really good to speak with you. We'll talk again in 2 weeks.
Okay. Thanks, Michelle.
That is Brian Minter, horticulturalist and master gardener, joining us from Country Garden Limited in Chilliwack. And that's it for our show today. My thanks to Rachel Adams, Alan Regan, George Baker, Mark Fairfield, Greg Kisser, and Rafe Arnott. You can listen to the show on the CBC Listen app and watch us on the CBC Vancouver YouTube page. I'm Michelle Eliot. Thank you for joining us. We end now on a song from the late Tupac Shakur, one of the most influential rappers of all time. I know I listened to him all throughout my high school years. Killed in 1996 in a fatal drive-by shooting. Today, a Nevada grand jury indicted Dwayne Caffey D. Davis in the killing. The charges were revealed today, just hours after he was arrested. We leave you with Tupac's Keep Your Head Up. Have a good weekend.
Why we crazy? I blame my mother for turning my brother into a crack baby. We ain't meant to survive cause it's a setup. And even though